Hey there, students. Today's lesson is on quadratic functions, and specifically we want to learn how to use square roots to solve a quadratic function. So first, let's review square roots. A square root is a number, variable, or term that when squared gives you the term you took the square root of. For example, square root of 9 is 3 or negative 3, because 3 squared equals 9, or negative 3 squared also equals 9. Likewise, the square root of 16x to the second power equals 4x or negative 4x, because 4x to the second power equals 4x times 4x, which is 16x to the second power. Likewise, negative 4x squared equals negative 4x times negative 4x, which is also 16x to the second power. So, as we see here, each square root has two roots. For example, the square root of 25 equals 5 or negative 5. Now we also write this using a symbol plus or minus, signifying the positive root and the negative root of 5. So now let's look at how you actually use square roots to solve a quadratic equation. So first step in using this process is that you want to isolate the squared term, and then you want to take the square root, and always remember, nearly every number has two square roots, a positive and a negative. The only exception would be square root of 0, which is just 0. Alright, so let's look at some examples of solving quadratic equations using square roots. So here we have the equation x to the second power equals 9. Now the first thing I notice is that the squared term is already isolated, so I just simply take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared would just be x, and the square root of 9 would be positive or negative 3. Okay, so let's look at our second example. Our second example is x squared equals negative 25. Okay, again, I'm just going to take the square root of both sides. However, whenever I try to take the square root of a negative number, my calculator tells me that there's an error. That's because you cannot take the square root of a negative number. So, the answer to a square root of a negative number would be a no solution problem. Okay? So let's move on to example number 3, which says 3x to the second power minus 75 equals 0. So the first thing I want to do is isolate my x squared term. So I'm going to add 75 to both sides. Now that gives me 3x squared equals 75. Then I'll divide by 3. And x squared equals 25. Next, I'll take the square root of both sides, And when I do, I find out that x equals positive or negative 5, because the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, let's move on to our fourth example. 4x to the second power minus 64 equals 0. So again, I want to isolate my variable. So I'm going to add 64 to both sides. That leaves me with 4x squared equals 64. And I'll divide by 4 again, leaving me with x squared equals 16. Now I'm going to take my square root of both sides, leaving me with the result of x equals positive or negative 4. Okay, let's move on to the next example, which is 3x to the second power plus 15 equals 0. So I'm going to isolate my variable again. I'm going to subtract 15. That leaves me with 3x squared equals negative 15. Now I'm going to divide by 3. And I see x squared equals negative 5. Again, I can't take the square root of a negative number. Therefore, this is a no solution problem. Okay, let's take a look at an example that's a word problem here. Problem says a museum is planning an exhibit that will contain a large globe. The surface area of the globe will be 315 feet squared. Find the radius of the sphere producing this surface area. Use the equation S equals 4 pi r squared, where S is the surface area and r is the radius. The first thing I notice is that this right here happens to be my surface area. They give me the equation or formula for that. So I think what I'll do is substitute 315 for S. And solve for R. So first thing I need to do is divide by 4 pi to isolate my variable of R, because I'm being asked to find R, or find the radius, which is R. Okay, so that leaves me with R squared equals 315 divided by 4 pi. So R squared equals 315 divided by 4 times 3.14. So that's 315 divided by 12.56 equals R to the second power. And then last, I would take my square root. So R equals the square root of 315 divided by 12.56, which gives me a result of 5. And so when I run that through my calculator, I get an answer of 5.0079, and I'm going to round that off to 5.01.